Hello, everyone, and welcome to another irregular session of Conversations from the Edge. And it is just a wonderful time because we have Peter Mark Adams back to talk about his fourth book, or is it fifth? Really fifth, because we never discussed your book on healing. I don't believe we ever talked about that.
No, we didn't. No.
But for those who aren't aware of it, maybe you can do a little plug for it at the end. But what we're talking about now is Ritual and Epiphany in the Mysteries of Mithras. And of course, it is a beautiful bound book, a beautiful printed, and incredibly informative. And for those of you who are listening, my copy will be going into the rare book collection at the University of Scranton Library as part of the IHS collection. So they have a full range of Peter's books up there. So current and future scholars will have access to them. So that said, Peter, welcome back. I think it's been, as you said before we started recording, about 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation, Mark. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. We have to we
Well,
have to produce books on a more regular basis, I think, so we can do this at least once a year.
Well, we tried for last year, like in the middle of last year, and it just kept getting the
It did.
proverbial can just kept getting kicked down the road.
Yeah.
And by the
Yeah.
time November's here, forget about it. So I'm just thrilled. As I joked with you, I'm wearing a sweater. All of our viewers know that if I've got this on, it's cold in my
Yeah.
office. So
Okay.
how is it over there in Turkey? Because I want
Well,
to be jealous.
it has become very cold, but basically we're facing a drought. The very cold spell has not, throughout autumn, and now we're mid-January. There's been very little rain and very little snow, so the dams are at very low levels going into the new year. And if it doesn't pick up in spring, we'll have a very difficult summer. So we're kind of fingers crossed day to day now that it'll pour down. We need torrential rain.
Well, to get off topic, if I understand correctly, that is a region-wide problem. Uh,
Yeah,
Iran and
except
other
they had
areas are
snow in
having.
Saudi Arabia from all places.
Yeah. Well, they do get it once a decade, right? Something like
Yeah,
Egypt, right?
they got our snow this year, so there you go.
Well, your book was just wonderful, and I think because well, I like everything you do. I really enjoyed speaking with you and digging deep into this, but uh, the cult of Mithras is that subject matter which has always been tangential to everything I do, but I've never
Mm.
really had a chance to sit down and read a book on it.
Yeah.
So this was just a great opportunity, and I
Well,
want to
the
thank you for
funny
that.
thing is, Mark, when I was doing the literature review for this book, almost every single significant book on Mithraism is at least but 30 to 40 years old. So
Has there
this is like the first major, you know, thorough going through of the cult of Mithras in decades.
is it just academic
Yeah,
publications
it's
just up
folded
there?
into Roman studies now, and a lot of very academic articles are directed to the who were the members, kind of what social class and all of this kind of stuff. So, but a sweeping look at the cult as a mystery cult has almost disappeared off the shelves, which is extraordinary when you think of its kind of tenacity in our memory.
Well, and because as we mentioned, there's the myth that we want to talk about, and do it now or later, about Mithraism as being a challenge or rival to Christianity. But in the current era, the revival of the cult and the building of temples. I mean, I remember seeing
Yeah,
articles over the last year or two in which people were celebrating the opening of the first, was it Mithraeum in
yeah,
so many thousands or 1500 years? I mean, this is wonderful. At least
yeah.
wonderful if you enjoy classical paganism, as we do. So for us, this is wonderful. But so
Yeah,
it's interesting
definitely.
how the popular interest in Mithras is ahead of the curve compared to the academic.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, absolutely. And it's extraordinary. I've, I mean, I've been pursuing the cult for decades before the opportunity came up to settle down and do this book, which hadn't been planned, by the way. This was not a planned writing exercise. It was part of a far wider, far more sweeping research into the idea of a cult of Saturn. And this emerged out of it. And it took me down some extraordinarily unexpected avenues.
Well, let's do two or three things. Let's look at the origins of it. What, and before we do that, what was really the fascination for you as you were delving into it, the origins of the cult, and then link us back, if you can or will, to its connection to your other book, The Cult of Saturn, and maybe
Mm,
how it came up in there. And we
yeah.
can fill a half an hour just with that, but let's go there.
Okay. I mean, I find it very difficult to account for my obsession with the mystery cults of antiquity. It's always been there. And it's kind of a driving passion in my life. So whenever I saw a book about the mysteries, I just automatically bought it and put it on the shelf. So I kind of stocked up over the years with all the significant books on the mysteries and then started picking them off slowly one by one. And the wheel came round, and it was time for the cult of Mithras. But as I say, it emerged from a much wider inquiry I was engaged in on the notion of a cult of Saturn and what that was and how it manifested in different ages. So it wasn't long before the cult of Mithras itself fell out of that research. Um, and the way it did is the recognition that all of the key Mithraic iconography is essentially a evolution of the Orphic Phanes emerging from the egg. And that led me to start saying, well, this is always framed as a Roman cult. How come it has this strong Orphic element at its very core? And that led
And
me into
could
looking
you
at the
just
origins.
briefly describe Orphism for the Orphic cult for people who may not be aware of
Yes,
what it means?
it's like the Greeks had like Hesiod's theogony, which is the kind of mainstream account of creation and the doings of the gods. But Orphism had a far more esoteric cosmology, which doesn't touch on Hesiod's account whatsoever. It starts off with primordial water, and from that mud forms, and from the mud a great dragon emerges, and it gives birth to an egg. And when that egg bursts open through the force of its own energy, this figure Phanes, pure illumination, emerges from it. So this is a deeply layered um, cosmological symbol with existential import for anyone who works with the higher energies. Okay, it's a
And
kind
just
of composite symbol in
and
that
just
sense.
for our listeners, those
Mm.
familiar with alchemy and alchemical symbolism will
Mm.
note that the egg is a powerful symbol. It is also a symbol of the secret fire, and we
Yeah.
often see it surrounded by the dragon as well. So just just so you know, guys, is if you're new to this and you're listening, there's a tremendous amount of importance here that you can research.
So I started looking at all the iconography that is not necessarily the tauroctony, the bull killing scene that dominates most discourse. And as I looked at the iconography, I saw it as evolving out of this Orphic figure. So the one direction it took was towards ritual performance. The other direction it took was towards trying to express what was the state that Mithraic initiation sought to confer. And it has quite two quite clear lines of iconography answering these two questions. The ritual question is answered by a figure finally emerging, um, breathing fire, able to ignite from the breath, so to speak, which will be a familiar motive to almost anyone who does energy based initiation practice. The other track took me towards a thing called the sleep of Kronos. In other words, Mithras ultimately emerges into the golden age. And kind of discourse becomes metaphoric now because they're trying to explain a state of non-dual awareness. And the metaphor is the golden age where there's a state of perfection and stillness. And Kronos is sleeping in the golden age. And so, this beautiful metaphor is caught in the iconography itself. So I was delighted with this research in the sense that it finally opened out in a concrete way a ritual process and the end state that it was aiming to realize. And given those two, let's say, posts fixed in the ground, I was then able to take back bearings and look at the grade structure as an apparatus to bring somebody into the cult and deliver them to a point where they could actually experience this for themselves. So that's kind of the logic I pursued.
When I read about this notion of the sleep of Kronos, it struck me because it immediately reminded me of, excuse me, not only some of the other philosophical ideas around this notion of eternity and time. Uh, some use the notion of unity and duality, but I don't like that because it implies that duality itself is not a unity, and it is. But what we're really talking about is eternity and time, and that is, or timelessness in time. So a stability or motion. And if we look at least some of the understanding of Kabbalah, it is that Edenic state, which is often said to be, well, Eden means bliss. One of the meanings of the
Yeah.
word is bliss. This blissful state then becomes interrupted. So, when you're in that state of bliss, it's always considered to be an eternal state. You know, it's like when we talk about the eternal soul.
Mm.
I said to someone, it's not so much that your soul is eternal, but it's more or less that your understanding or experience of the eternal is lost.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it as consciousness losing an awareness of something, like you forgot where your car keys are or where you
Yeah.
parked in the parking lot. Um, so I just think for me, when I read that notion of the sleep of Kronos, the sleep of time, uh, that has a tremendous amount of importance on the initiatic understanding of this whole
Mm.
spectrum of becoming. So thank you for that.
So that having arrived at that point, I started casting my net into the preceding cultures. Um, and what I found is that the cult was transferred to Rome in the first century CE, and it was transferred in the context of a political settlement between Rome and Parthia. And the disputed territory was Armenia. And so an agreement was struck whereby the Parthians nominated the king, but the Romans crowned the king. So he had a kind of dual allegiance, and that was thought to be sufficient to secure the peace. So, as part of that, the Armenian king Tiridates I, I think, went to Rome, to Nero's court, and during his sojourn there, it was quite a few months, he introduced the court to the cult of Mithras. And then it kind of took on a life of its own because the Roman context was so distinct, it molded the cult to its own image. Okay, so we can move into that, or we can continue in our journey backwards in time.
I just want to say that they always say how Christianity defeated Rome. And I said no, Rome defeated Christianity. All
Yeah.
they did is it's like they remade it in their own
Oh,
image, and Rome, the image of
absolutely.
Rome.
Yeah, yeah.
Pick the
So,
direction you'd like to go in. Anyone
well,
is
I'll just
fine.
tie off the bit about Roman Mithraism or the cult of Mithras in Rome. I'll just tie it off very briefly. We'll return to it later. But given that Nero had accepted the cult at the court, it almost guaranteed that the court would accept the cult. And then on the back of appointments from Rome to the provinces, it spread like wildfire. So you have Mithraeus or Mithraic templum temples, as they call them, from Hadrian's Wall to Syrian deserts, from Anatolia to the Atlantic coast to the banks of the Rhine and Danube, and especially the Rhine and Danube, where the legions were concentrated. Curiously, though, that the appointments to these places would be from secondary aristocracy, essentially country gentlemen, who had a far more conservative view of social ethics and were not like the old aristocracy in Rome itself, who had been in power for 3 or 4 centuries in some cases. As they had learned by this point that appointing the old aristocratic families to a wealthy province with legions was just not a good bet. Could lead to some very unexpected or expected results. So yeah, by and large, they recruited from the country aristocracy. And they, of course, would have traveled with a small entourage. They wouldn't go on these appointments by themselves. They would have political advisor, a military advisor, a legal advisor, somebody good with the supply chain understanding. All of this kind of knowledge would go with them, and they would be their most trusted people and probably extended family members. And that would be the nucleus of a Mithraic temple. Essentially, it was no more than a group of half a dozen to 10 people in most of the provincial centers. And they never proselytized, but they did recruit if their numbers dropped beneath a certain level. So they maintained a cadre, certain level. And all of this was paid for out of their own pockets. So the Mithraic pater financed initially the temple, its various bits of equipment, the frescoes or reliefs. It's quite an expense to set one up. And then the ongoing kind of costs of the meals, which seems to have been their primary ritual, by the way, a sacred banquet to the god, which is unusual because that is uniquely a feature of Hellenistic Anatolian culture. Sacred banquet along with the god. So that's how it spread anyway, and because of the volume of appointments to the empire as it continued to expand and came under pressure, it grew along with it. Looking backwards now, we've already seen there's strong Hellenistic elements in the cult, the Orphism, basic metaphysics. Rome was permeated with Orphism in the last 2 centuries BC and the first couple of centuries CE. And we saw that in the Villa of the Mysteries, the initiatory sequence in the Villa of the Mysteries in Pompeii was a Roman elite Orphic cult, basically. No expense spared. So the Roman elite had been thoroughly imbued with the spirit of Orphism for centuries before Mithraism arrived on the scene. And so it was easy to see its Orphic precedents given the iconography. Even the bull killing scene reminds me of Dionysus's murder by the Titans in the form of a bull. I'm not aware of many other classical sources that have that particular image.
Could you just briefly tell our listeners what the goal of Orphic initiation would have been, so they can have a comparison and contrast to that of Mithric initiation? What is the purpose? What is the end result that the candidate is hoping for?
The candidate needs to be progressed through a series of stages that ensure the ethical purification of the energy body, the repair of the energy body to be a vehicle sufficient to sustain a contact with the deity, which would be the final initiation. And once you have that initiation, there isn't another one. There's not like 7 grades to plod through here. There's like induction, which is very much on the lines of men's societies with some form of hazing, and then a purification ritual by water and then by fire. So to an ethical purification and then the purification of the familial and ancestral karma. And we don't know the timing between these grades, but I suspect that there would be a period in which you would be expected to serve in the temple. And we have some illustrations that seem to indicate that. And I think anyway, given that these temples were such tight circles of people who were not proselytizing, to be invited to join, they would be pretty sure of the ethical standing of the people they were bringing in, because they were joining a larger family, essentially. It wouldn't get much bigger, and they would be key components in it for its sacred feasts. So that all suggests a certain conditioning, a certain type of person attracted to the cult, um, despite its secrecy, to be frank, because it had virtually no presence in the public domain. It's the Mithraists were known to each other as the Syndexioi, actually. That's what they call the people of the handshake, the grip.
Well, I'm seeing some similarities to Freemasonry here, not only
Yes,
in terms of
that's
the,
interesting
the sign
parallel.
of recognition. The immediate sign of recognition is how you shake someone's hand and how they
Yeah,
respond.
yeah,
Although there are varieties, there's the one basic one that every Master Mason knows. Uh, then there's this other notion of uh, not proselytizing.
yeah,
And while there's been some proselytizing, means invite someone in. People now will often see ads for
yeah,
Freemasonry, but that requires that the individual inquire about it, not that you come up to them and say, "Hey, would you like to join the club?" It
yeah,
doesn't work that way. At least it shouldn't work that way. And that notion is that as someone is considered for candidacy, that there's a period of time, and it depends on which jurisdiction you're in. In some jurisdictions, it's up to a year, which I think it should be. In others, it's not that long, but in which you get to know the person. Uh, you visit them. There's a visitation at their home. I've been on these
mm,
visitations, visitation committee, and
yeah,
you look around and you talk to their family if they're there, their wife, and you say, "Is it okay if so and so is out for, a night or two a month?" You begin to understand the relationship. So there's some similarity between that and the classical initiation. And of course, Freemasonry is big on dinners. Unfortunately, fish fries are not maybe the sacred host, but
I
I'm
think the
just
other element with
you can see this
Mithraism is,
continuity in different ways.
yeah, is fellowship.
Fellowship, yeah.
It's like one of the, the iconography suggests to you that modeling yourself on Mithras as a hero, as a proto-miste, let's say, gives you the exemplary qualities of an initiate. And courage and bravery are there. There's no doubt about it. Persistence, um, certain stability, and good fellowship. You need to be able to sit and enjoy these people's company. So all of these qualities, yeah, I do think of them as essentially Masonic qualities as well. Yeah. So in our story, then, I was seeing these very strong Hellenistic elements. And so I started digging back into the deeper past. And lo and behold, I find a passage in the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's called the episode of the Bull of Heaven, which exactly describes the tauroctony. And that would be dated, I mean, it's written 2000 BCE, and therefore presumably was part of an oral tradition long before. And we're looking back into the Neolithic all of a sudden, which is an extraordinarily deep rooted system of iconography. And then the next kind of major stage I found was in the Middle Bronze Age Anatolia, a peace treaty between the Mitanni and Hittites. Cite Mithras as one of the deities overseeing it. And the kind of signet ring of the Mitanni ruler actually has a figure inscribed on it, which looks almost identical to the tauroctony, the bull killing scene. So these incredible continuities, given the discontinuity of history, nevertheless, we're experiencing massive continuities in iconography and intent. Because Mithras, of course, also occurs in the Avesta and in the Sanskrit. And so we're looking at a deity who presumably was well established in Proto-Indo-European language home.
And that raises the question, just what does Mithras mean? If we were,
Yeah, I mean, the essential core of the god is of making compacts and agreements. So is kind of the basis on which society is glued together.
okay.
Without this, you cannot have a society, essentially, unless there's a code governing how people interact with each other, that the agreements they make are stick, for want of a better word, and are fulfilled. And so as a god, he is essentially the deity overseeing all such agreements. And of course, that's why he would be so attractive to a ruling elite. It's essentially one of their most critical functions is to decide on what things to agree to as regards other peoples. And
Well,
having done so, to hold the agreement in place. So very fundamental building block of the human cultural path of emergence towards civilizations, multiple civilizations that ran in the Indian subcontinent, Mesopotamia, so on. Not Egypt. I couldn't find any connection
yeah,
between Mithras and Egypt. I think I was commenting earlier,
yes,
very few civilizations had any impact on Egypt whatsoever.
yeah.
So deeply rooted in itself that it's almost impervious to, at least until the conquest by the Macedonians in the fourth century. And even they became more Egyptian
Yes.
than Macedonian. Had no choice but to feign Egyptianness. So
They
anyway,
go native. They all
yeah,
go native.
exactly. They did. Yeah, in almost every sense. Yeah. Um,
Well, social fabric, trust is the basis of it.
yeah.
And I've said that very often within contemporary esotericism. Uh, One of its great failing is while it has opened the doors widely, like a giant funnel to introduce people to ideas, those ideas are uh, contextualized,
Mm,
and they're often recontextualized, as we see even with the cult of Mithras, within the cultural fabric, the political fabric of the day. And those in the 20th and 21st century, um, there are certain assumptions about what that means. And the notion of ethics and virtue is even decontextualized to not mean an inner strength, an inner accomplishment, um, like a city of some kind, we see the notion of esotericism not really having a ethical aspect.
Yeah, which is curious because it was the building block.
It's a building block. Yeah.
Um, the cardinal virtues or the Roman system of honor was fun. I mean, I think you'd probably say in the Hellenist or pre-Hellenistic age, it became very much internalized. So that whereas, for instance, in Homer, um, it's performative in the sense that, but by the time of the classical age and Plato and so on, it becomes internalized. And in that sense, it's the bedrock of Orphism as an esoteric system. And you see it played out in Mithraism as literally a series of icons that depict the ideal virtues that a person needs to embody going forward. So it's a curious thing that should have, well, have less of a apparent role to play in modern esotericism.
I think because, at least in the United States, um, certain Sunday school Protestant values became so widespread, they became assumed.
Mm,
And then they became disconnected from their source of origin, which is Protestant Sunday school.
yeah,
So now they become social values, and a social value that has no connection to a religious value, then has, or metaphysical value at that point, then becomes optional.
yeah, exactly.
And then it becomes no longer a point of inner transformation, a
Mm.
tool of inner transformation.
So that would suggest that anyone on the esoteric path needs to pay a lot of attention to fundamental systems of ethics in order to make any progress whatsoever.
Now, you mentioned that the initiation, and this is for some clarity here, and I
Mm.
thought this was a really good point that you made, because this often gets confused, is not the same as rites of passage.
Yeah,
But these are two
yeah,
different things.
absolutely. Yeah. So rites of passage are compulsory coming of age rituals that everyone needs to pass through. There's no exceptions. Um, whereas a mystery rite is totally voluntary, undertaken by the tiniest percentage of any population that you can imagine. And even amongst, for instance, the devotees of a god, no more than 30 or 40% of them would have gone, so to speak, the full way to actually encounter the deity in full mystery initiation. And Proclus is quite clear about this. He says, at the point at which the deity is arriving is the most powerful charge. And there's a stream of daemonic or Chthonian entities stream through the ritual space. That scares the life out of the initiates. But it's part of their preparation that they need to be prepared for this step into a liminal space. The the dissolution of that barrier that normally shields all of this stuff from us. When you go to meet a deity face to face, so to speak, that barrier is gone. You're fully exposed to that reality.
And that terror of the threshold is, to use the late 19th century term, um, is not exclusive to those rights. It's carried over into the present. I'm well aware of many people who, even in some fairly, what to me were innocuous introductory rights,
Mm-hmm.
would get to the door, quite literally to the door, and they'd panic.
Yeah, yeah. I
I
mean,
remember my great uncle telling me about being in uh, several initiations, waiting outside,
yeah,
and they could hear, the preparation going on in the temple, and then he'd say sometimes you just see someone just like that. They get up, they leave, you never see them again. And
yeah.
I've seen people literally have full-blown panic attacks over what were
Mm,
really pretty, I don't want to say non-threatening, because clearly within that psychic dimension of the individual, they're feeling anxious, so they feel some kind of threat.
hmm.
But if you were to see the ritual through when it was
Exactly.
over, it was not
Yeah.
it
I
was
mean,
not a
and
big deal.
Proclus was saying this in the fifth century. He said, all
Yeah.
those who just, hang in there
Hang
have
in
a
there.
blissful, yeah, you know, he wa- so that advice has long been given. Yeah. So, but it rather brings up the question of preparation. And I can only assume their energy body was not in a state fit to acknowledge or to be open to the experience. And it brings us back to preparation and what preparation is efficacious on any path, spiritual, mystical, even magical. Earlier we talked about the book I wrote on healing. And one of the reasons I wrote that was to gather together the most extreme cases of healing that we had encountered in our practice as a way of illuminating how the integrity of the energy body is essential to your spiritual progress. And the depths of cleaning that is required is more than just a couple of rituals. I mean, there's an ancestral dimension to it, which can be very persistent and very stubborn unless you're really focused on thorough cleansing of the kind of karmic seeds, so to speak. I think too often that is made to look like one or two ritual processes will be sufficient to do the job. And I'm deeply skeptical of that. And I think there's also a point where it's not just about yourself, it's about how you earn your money in the world and what you do and what service ultimately you bring. Um, because I do see that ultimately as the only guarantor of a clear spiritual path. It's the service element in it that redeems us as personas,
Mhm.
despite our other dimensions of being. It's the service element that redeems us.
I'm reminded of a phrase that was quite commonly stated in Tibetan Buddhism, particularly among the Nyingma, in which Padmasambhava is said to have referred to his path. He goes, my view, meaning my acceptance, my understanding is as wide as the sky, but my actions are as fine as flour.
Hmm.
And I say that because within this same framework, we've seen a lot of people want to adopt the crazy wisdom yogi persona,
Yeah,
whether it be Tibetan or Indian, where just anything goes.
yeah, yeah,
This notion of non-duality, and I don't really enjoy that word too much. Is this again? They adopt it as the notion that, oh, I don't really have to do anything because everything's, was it Candide? Was it God is in his heavens, all rights with the world, everything's
yeah. I
fine.
mean, it's a concept that could only arise in this day and age.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't have to purify myself because everything is fine.
Yeah,
Uh, I'm
I'm
already
enlightened
pure. I'm
already.
naturally pure, so I can do whatever I want. Uh,
Yeah,
and then
yeah. It's
nature has a way of showing
sophistry, of
otherwise.
course. It's pure sophistry.
Yeah, sophistry, more sophistry. Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
So
and for our philosophy 101 students, sophistry is Well, we just defined it for you. You know a lot of them. Pontificators.
Yeah. So, having kind of traced the iconography all the way back to the Middle Bronze Age, and I was pretty sure that the roots of this thing were in the, who knows, somewhere in the Neolithic, somewhere in the Proto-Indo-European heartland. It retained its currency in the Hellenistic kingdoms, which succeeded Alexander's great conquest of the Middle East. And those small kingdoms had a quite, often the ruler had Mithridates as their main name. So there was a Mithridates of Pontus and a Mithridates of Commagene and so on. So, and in fact, I've just finished writing an extended article on the Mount Nemrut in Turkey, at the summit of which there's this huge, what they call a hierothesion, which is a massive astrally aligned set of stelae and statues which commemorate the coronation of this dynastic line. And they've done the most elaborate, like there's a configuration of four planets, the new moon and Regulus. And the one occasion on which that is visible on the horizon, they've calculated it and oriented the entire site to that. So it would emerge on the solstice, on the horizon, or conversely set in the evening in the west. So that distinguishes the setting one is the father going into the west. The rising one is his son, Antiochus the First. Now, I looked at the mathematics of this, how this configuration of astral or celestial events could be calculated, given that it occurs once in how many thousand of years. And I can only assume it was based on Babylonian star tables
Mhm.
that fell into the hands of Alexander and Alexander's successors, and therefore formed the basis of Hellenic or Hellenistic astronomy, actually, we're talking about. So it's interesting that they were able to organize the landscape, the dynastic deities, statues and stelae, and the astral, the occurrences in the sky to all come together, to sanctify this place. And of course, one of those deities is Mithras. So the reason I'm going over this is to try and underline how deeply embedded the cult was in the Hellenistic kingdoms of
Yeah,
the
this
four.
was not a sudden arrival on the scene with the Roman legionnaires.
Yeah,
And this was a
yeah,
widespread.
and
Uh,
profoundly. I mean, to exert this amount of time and effort and intellectual effort as well, to make these calculations and then cart the stone up a mountain and erect this site is absolutely phenomenal level of dedication. It goes, a lot of people who just casually see the site would say, oh, it's the vanity of the king, to put his
mhm,
statues up there. But to serve a political purpose, they didn't need to go through such an extended and intellectual exercise.
mhm.
They didn't need to take such pains to organize it and astrally coordinate it. Large statues would have done the job,
Right.
but no, they went far beyond that. And again, it just underlines the extent to which this was deeply rooted in their culture, essentially an animist, complete animist perception of reality, in which the deities are functioning elements of their social organization, and the ruler is the mediator of those blessings, so to speak, to the land and the people. And this is a very archaic notion of rulership, of kingship. You do see it in Egypt, of course, from until quite late, actually. But yeah, so that has changed my perspective on the origins of Mithraism. And so I'm just writing a second volume, a companion to Ritual and Epiphany, in which we will explore celestial religion in the first site I'm going to look at is Yazilikaya. It's a Hittite star temple carved out of the living rock just near the Hittite capital, south of Ankara, currently. And from that to this Mount Nemrut, and then on to, of course, once the cult was internalized in Rome, it lost its landscape, so to speak. It became a cult that functioned underground in small or semi-underground recesses. And the
But it
best
became
that they could do
urbanized.
is paint stars on the ceiling, but they essentially lost that connectivity to the astral religion. So I'm good, but nevertheless, I've got some high definition astrophotography in which a correspondent who will help me with this argues that the original night skies were sufficiently rich in nebulae and dark valleys to suggest many elements of the Mithraic iconography as elements of the night sky. So we will explore that as well. That'll be a companion, hopefully by mid-year. Fingers crossed.
Well, it seems like what you described in some ways is the movement of the cult practices, uh, the transformation that takes place when they become urbanized,
Yeah,
when they
exactly
become
so.
an urban phenomena,
Yeah.
and not that there was a great deal of light pollution
No,
in that world, but there's just
not on Hadrian's
certain things
Wall.
just change. Yeah. Now we talked about the degrees. There's often the question of how many degrees are in the system and what that means. You've stated that there were 3 degrees that were for the majority of the candidates for the members, and that the remaining 4 degrees were more, we'll say, administrative
Yeah.
in nature.
Initiatory.
Like if you could elaborate on that for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing I really get hammered for because the 7 degree progression is so fixed in people's minds. It's like I've turned the table upside down. But in fact, it was first proposed by Manfred Klaus, one of the great historians of Mithraism. His book is translated into English. Again, it's one of these 30-odd-year-old, 40-year-old books, which are the backbone of Mithraic scholarship. So it's not a new idea, but it's one which occurred to me because of my experience dealing with Hellenistic mystery cults. And in those cults, it was quite clear that there were um, purification as a preparatory task and then initiation. And you could repeat the initiation again and again. You could come back any time and do it. But there wasn't more steps to go because the sanctuaries had a permanent priesthood there. There were people there who, through their family lineage, held the initiatory tradition. So in the case of Eleusis, it was the Eumolpidae family, and they are named in the Homeric hymn to Demeter. So at least from the 7th, 8th century BCE, the family was recognized as and they continued until the last Eumolpidae priest, Nestorius, in the end of the 4th century CE. So it's 1,000 years of initiatory lineage. I mean, it's like what you see in the Indian subcontinent today, essentially. Some of the Vajrayana traditions are equally deep in their initiatory lineages. So, given that background, I had, so to speak, a scale upon which to look at Mithraic initiation, knowing that it had emerged out of a Hellenistic background, that it had the same iconography, the same metaphysics. I had to surmise that it had pretty well the same approach to mystery initiation. And when I looked at it, the obvious cutoff point was the grade of lions, because the lions are expressly stated to have been a purificatory grade. They were the people who did the initiation by fire that cleansed the so to speak karmic traces. So from the lines up, which is 4 levels, had to be initiatory and or administrative. And that was the basic logic, but I'm having a lot of difficulty getting people to change their minds on that. Of course, they're so kind of fixed with the 7 degrees, but really it's a logic just based on the background and roots of Mithraism in the Hellenic world. It's a very simple logic. So induction has to take place. That wasn't really necessary when you had sanctuaries of priests. Now it's a private cult. It's financed and run by the small group of people who are members. How they got their lineage is a big question mark. Okay, that's an interesting question. But given that they had a lineage, they would have to induct people themselves, make sure the community would not be disrupted by their presence, and then progress simply through purification by water, purification by fire, and that would lead them to full initiation by the pater, the head of the cult himself.
Well, this has certain, for listeners, certain similarities to Masonry in that at one time there were 2 degrees: entered apprentice, master mason, and then at some point the entered apprentice was divided and then turned into, so you had fellow craft, so you had the
Yeah,
3 degrees. And really, once you got the 3rd degree, that was it. And everything afterwards, which the 4th was considered very important in some systems, but these were all considered explanatory or exploratory degrees. They weren't, as some people like to think of them, as higher degrees, as if there's
yeah,
something. No, they're taking the basic ideas you were presented with and elaborating on them or exploring them in a different, usually dramatic or historical or philosophical setting for those who are wondering how it's done. But we have become very obsessed in Western esotericism with this notion of having to go through, everything has to line up.
mm,
So we have to be going up the tree.
yeah,
So we got to have 10 degrees of initiation. Or we have to be going around the orbit of the sun. So we've got to have 7 degrees of initiation.
yeah,
We've got to, where sometimes, no, sometimes there's just 2 or 3 degrees, and then it's just working with it. And
yeah,
what you said about initiation in terms of like within Vajrayana, you go through the period. I mean, it's a symbolic often rather than literal anymore, but there's a period of instruction, purification, then empowerment. And you can go to
yeah,
that empowerment as many times as you want.
yeah,
But once it's done, it's done. You've been introduced to the
yeah,
practice and in theory to the whatever meditational deities are involved. And
yeah,
in theory, they're present. And that's it. And that's
yeah.
pretty
Then the hard
classic.
work starts,
Then the
Mark.
hard work starts. Yeah, then it's done.
Sadhana, daily
Yeah.
sadhana. Yeah, I guess the sacred feast that they had was really the primary ritual for them in the Mithraeum, because it wasn't feasting in the sense in which the Greeks and Romans feasted. It was really a community in communion with the deity.
So Eucharistic.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. So that's kind of it for the cult of Mithras. This is the understanding I've come to um, after plumbing the depths of its metaphysics and cultural background. Yeah.
You had mentioned that the goal, I don't, or the gift rather than the goal, the gift of initiation was not just meeting the deity, but a full-on possession by the deity. And um, Stephen Davies, who wrote, did a translation on the Gospel of Thomas, also wrote a book called Spirit Possession,
Mm.
uh, and the Origins of Christianity. And he presented at
Okay.
the IHS conference years ago. And we've discussed this often. And his notion was quite fascinating. It was that the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost, everyone would be possessed, but the Holy Spirit was like all the spirits. It was more powerful. It's like, oh, our God is bigger than your God. And that it
Okay.
really was a full-on possession
Mm.
of a sort. That is, you were completely absorbed into this. I don't want to call it a deity, but it's really similar to what we're talking about. People expected some kind of inner realization, but also incoming of energy, not just
Hmm.
inspiration in the general sense of breath, but a real
Yeah.
incoming of deity into their psychophysiological system.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I see possession cult as the kind of ground zero of human spiritual development. It's the one element of religious culture which is attested in every single known culture, and from the earliest records that we have in the Upper Paleolithic to today. So it's an extraordinary accompaniment in the kind of spiraling rise of human spiritual awareness, I would say. It has rested on a very primitive foundation, but for instance, in the Vajrayana, it's conducted in a very sophisticated way. For most people, I think, who pass through the large initiations, it is a smooth, powerful movement to have the vision of the deity and feel filled, having had the personas quietly move to one side. Whereas I suspect initiation into the Dionysian mysteries was far more traumatic, let's say, far more hyper energized. And indeed, the same again with the Voodoo cults, which are still practiced today, highly energized, highly intrusive, so to speak. If the record is telling us the truth about them. So yeah, there's not one way of accomplishing this, and the more refined the apparatus, the smoother the process, the more sure the process, from what I can see.
And to go back, we would say that that refinement is uh, the ethical and virtuous enhancement, purification, and enhancement of the candidate.
Yeah, and the amount of energy that the initiators bring to the process, the sheer power of their daily communion with the deity is so strong that it's not a major disconnect to enact the initiation. And that's why I suspect that the upper grades in the Mithraic cult were fairly rare, because the demands that it makes on a person above and beyond the ethical demands, the demands it makes on them for maintaining daily communion with the deity are so extreme from a day-to-day point of view. It almost excludes having a normal life, I would have thought.
I think that point right there is often ignored in contemporary esotericism, that the demands and requirements of certain things have profound impacts on your ability to engage with society, and because
Yeah, I mean,
you're acting as a pivot point, a connecting point between the visible and the
absolutely.
invisible.
I mean, the full sadhana is like a day's long meditation. Full sadhana as for the Kalashakra or something. There's a short one you could do in a couple of hours, but the full Monty, so to speak, it's
Right.
almost would take your day up every single day, practiced properly, and that of course is the high road that so few people are equipped to take. The circumstances of their lives and the amount you have to renounce in order to commit to that. and keep up with it. It really is, it takes quite a lot. So I can only imagine that to be a Mithraic pater um, would have been very much a full-time kind of spiritual communion. So that having being called upon to enact a major act of initiation, you didn't have to, so to speak, get up speed. You're you're kind of there. The deity is present to you on a daily basis, so that the transfer into a ritual process is easily accomplished.
Well, this raises several questions. One is, uh, do you believe or have any evidence to allow you to believe or suggest that there has been any continuity or continuation of the classical Mithric practices? With that, what do you, I mean, it's not exactly rivaling, in the recent any Netflix series, but what do you think is the reason for the revival or expanded interest in the Mithric cult that we've seen over the last few years? And what would you suggest to someone who would like to undertake this as a practice?
I think I'd see it as a parallel to Masonry, frankly. I don't see Masonry as a mystery cult in the true sense.
It's not.
I may be wrong, but I don't
It's
see
not.
it empowering in that strong sense of possession by a deity. But it is molding the character. I mean, if you engage
Hmm.
fully with your lodge's practices, it will, so to speak, cleanse and purify over time. And I imagine the people resurrecting a form of Mithraic practice will get the same benefits from it if they devote themselves to it. I can well imagine that. I hope that isn't too harsh, but it's just how it seems to me.
No, it sounds very reasonable. We often joke the spirit of possession that one will get in most lodges is that of trying to run away from there again the fish fry or the chicken dinner duty. Um,
Yeah.
there's some wonderful things that go on in and I'm referring to Anglo-Saxon masonry there.
Right.
There's some wonderful things that go on in it, and it's wonderful activities and potential, but you have to take advantage of that. The same thing in any of these that the the inspiration again the tap on the shoulder, the brief encounter with the idea of this is a great thing uh, is wonderful for any type of spiritual practice. But then at some point comes the daily grind.
Mm.
And that's where um, we separate out quite literally. That's where the candidate, the initiate, the true practitioners, that's where it all either comes together or comes apart because that's the purpose of it. How dedicated are you to this? And what do you expect out of it? Which is again why I asked you that. What do you expect from this practice? And if
Mm.
it's some kind of ethical or virtuous improvement, there'd better be something else that goes with that, which is the connection to the deity.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we see if there's no metaphysical element, well, what's the reason for doing it?
Yeah. Well, you could say that the pursuit of ethical excellence, let's say, virtue, as the Romans used to call it, is an end in itself. And you see that in Marcus Aurelius's meditations, the disciplines that he puts in there, the morning review of what he's going to do that day, the evening review of what he accomplished and didn't accomplish. This is kind of, self-justifying practice for a better quality of life and for a better quality of your presence in the lives of others. Let's put it that way.
But you have to already be
Oh yeah,
a
yeah,
trust because I'm just saying because if you don't have that metaphysical element, if there's no
yeah,
heaven, there's no hell, there's no reincarnation, there's no metapsychosis, there's no consequences to my actions.
Yeah, indeed.
then I've got no re. Okay,
Well, you're in hell already,
then
so
yeah, it's you just don't know it. Any closing words you'd like to give us, or tell us about future works or what's going on?
well, the main one is this companion volume to Ritual and Epiphany. I hope to have that done in the coming months. And as I say, it very closely tracks the importance of the celestial landscape in the unfolding of human spiritual practice, leading to the Roman cult of Mithras. So it'll dovetail into that in the last part. And beyond that, I've got a study of the Dionysian sarcophagi that I'll be working on in the later part of the year. Um, the reason for that is it's kind of an extension of Mistai again, but to look at a wider range of iconography in relation to the cult of Dionysus, which includes the notion of the erotic and how that fits in the spiritual path. So that's going to be an interesting topic to open. It's not one that's discussed very much, and yet clearly every major culture in the world has recognized that the erotic is a powerful force in the spiritual path. So I hope to explore that a little. Um, and then I've got various projects going on. What else? I'm working on the friezes of the Temple of Hecate at Lagina. Okay, so very, very difficult to find reproductions of these things. They were like 19th century discovery. They're held in Istanbul Archaeological Museum, but they're greatly eroded. It's very difficult to see what's going on. But I hope from that to glean something about the initiatory practices in her temple estate in Lagina. So that's a background task. Um, and then there's various writing, half a dozen book reviews I owe to various people. Um,
Yes, I know that one.
get in line. It's
That's
kind
right.
of, you know,
We're 6 months behind. Now we're just 5.5 months behind.
yes, a bit like that. Um, and that's it really for now. That'll be. I'm also still pursuing Middle Egyptian. Um, that's with Dr. Colleen Darnell. Her husband, Dr. John Darnell, of course, a very distinguished Yale archaeologist. Um, and so last 2 years, I think, we worked on reading the hieroglyphs in various temples and tombs of Egypt. Um, and that is geared towards trying to read and transcribe the inner sanctum of the Temple of Luxor that describes the birth of the pharaoh from the god Amun. So there's an entire sequence in which the gods kind of make a decision about this. They inform the pharaoh's mother that she is going to give birth to a deity,
Well,
and
that
then
sounds
she
familiar.
she conceives on a kind of metaphysical level um, the god and gives birth to him. And Hnum the potter is there making a model of the car and the
Mhm.
ancestral car. So it's all laid out as a sequence, this divine birth nativity sequence, and it was part of the process by which the pharaoh renewed their divinity on a yearly basis, part of the big Seb festival that took place. Um, so this is the most esoteric part of it. And I'm trying to get a clean transcription. Apparently, Lucy Lamy, I don't know if you know that name.
I do.
Yes.
Yes. Hmm.
Shwala
Hmm.
Lubitsch's goddaughter or something.
Hmm.
She has actually, I've actually received a PDF of her drawings of this entire sequence, but I don't have the hieroglyphs that go with it. In class, we've worked on some parts of the hieroglyphic translation, But I want to complete that and even do it in full color, if possible, which would be the first time you'll be able to look at this profoundly esoteric process. It emerged at least with Queen Hatshepsut. So it's a Middle Bronze Age, and this is various pharaohs. Actually, Alexander the Great, on the wall showing the pharaoh's divine birth, on the opposite wall, it shows Alexander the Great undergoing the same ritual. Of course, he was born of Amun, and he always presented himself as the son of Amun. And so that, of course, occurs again in the Sola Busca Tarot, because the court cards illustrate this tale of Alexander's conception by the god Amun. And it kind of underlies the theurgic ritual process underpinning the cards. So it's a ritual invocation of Amun because that was the god that Alexander invoked, and Alexander was the most successful general we've ever known. So it's got to be a good thing. So anyway, so chasing my tail through millennia and layers of culture.
I think that this is a good place to stop because I'm going to ask some questions and we're going to go on and on. And I like to keep it where people enjoy listening to it, but I'll ask you after we stop recording. Uh, and I just want to say this is just wonderful because I really look forward to these forthcoming volumes, our
Yeah,
discussion of them, and want to thank you very, very personally for the tremendous work that you've done and getting to know you over the years and our time together. Uh, and having confidence that when I tell people to read these works or make them available again, as we've done with our collection through the university, that we're really putting something together for the future.
yeah,
There is
yeah,
a kind of continuity going on and a continuation into the future. Um,
indeed.
so thank you so very much.
Not at all. It's been a pleasure, Mark. Say, look forward to maybe in a year's time in the next
Yeah,
one.
we'll set it up now.
Yeah,
Well, with that, I say thank you to everyone, and I do hope you've enjoyed this Conversations from the Edge. And of course, we have other ones with Peter Mark Adams and other folks who have some wonderful things to say about esotericism. People who may be known to you and maybe not that well known, but we like to have some fascinating discussions that are of value to you. And we, again, hope and believe that this one was. So until next time, thank you very much.